The Supreme Court decision on health care will send ripple effects from Wall Street to Washington. It will directly affect American business and will shape the presidential election. Chief Washington correspondent Peter Cook is on the Hill. He has more on how Congress is bracing for the decision. Peter there as well with a Senate Democrat who knows a lot about legal fights. Peter.
That's right. I'm joined by Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal. Spent 20 years as Attorney General of Connecticut. He also clerked for a Supreme Court justice, has argued 4 cases in front of the Supreme Court in the past. Thank you for joining us, first of all. I'm going to ask your legal judgment. First of all, what happens this morning?
Well, one certainty is that nobody can predict what will happen based on the questions that were asked or the comments made. I've seen countless cases where the questions gave absolutely no indication of what was going to happen, and in the cases that I've argued, fortunately, there was no indication in the questions or the comments. So my prediction is that the court will uphold the body of the law, the core reforms, and I will fight for those core reforms because they will be under challenge, whatever the court's result today.
There are a lot of Republicans here who are pushing hard for the individual mandate to be struck down. If the individual mandate is struck down, in your view, what happens to this legislation?
In the individual mandate, there is an assumption that the rest of it kind of hangs on the requirement that people have that insurance, and that the insurance companies then would push for some fundamental changes in the law, maybe even for complete repeal. But I think the fight will be about those core reforms. For example, the 23,000 young people in Connecticut and millions around the country who are now on their parents' policies up to the age of 26, or the prohibitions against discriminating against people with pre-existing conditions, or dropping people because they get sick, or billing them into bankruptcy because there are caps on either annual or lifetime limits. So these kinds of reforms are fundamental. In addition, there is support for prosecution, investigation of waste and fraud that I think is very, very important, regardless, again, of what the court decides on the individual mandate. So there are provisions that should be kept in place, should be preserved. I'm going to be fighting to preserve them, even if the individual mandate is struck down.
This is an election year. If for some reason the Roberts Court here were to strike down the entire law, what would be the political impact? How damaging would that be to President Obama and his reelection chances?
I think it would energize and galvanize many Democrats who support President Obama. I think one of the president's main obstacles is a sense of complacency, a lack of energy. He's done it once, and that base, I think, would be energized. But long term, Peter, I think more fundamentally, the court would do very grave damage to itself by striking down this law. You know, one of the precepts, one of the fundamental principles is the United States Supreme Court should not strike down a law unless it is clearly and convincingly unconstitutional. There's a presumption of constitutionality, and the court has done itself reputational damage, harm to its credibility through Bush v. Gore, Citizens United, and I think this decision, if it really completely invalidates an act of Congress, would continue that damage.
Let me ask you about the business impact here. There are a lot of small businesses that certainly we've heard folks talking about it on our air, probably folks in Connecticut who've talked to you, who say the cost of complying with this law is simply too onerous, that alone should be reason to do away with it.
Well, it may be good reason to change the law, and I would favor making reforms in the law. But it isn't a reason that the Supreme Court of the United States should strike down the law. It may be that they disagree with policies or certain provisions, but that is a challenge for us going forward. And so the Supreme Court's word will not be the last one. And I will push for changes that make the law less onerous, less costly, less burdensome to business.
All right. Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, like the rest of us watching the High Court today in this decision on health care, did we get a Republican perspective coming up a little later in the hour? Congressman Randy Burgess.
Peter, looking forward to it. Thanks very much joining us there from Capitol Hill. Well, when we come back.